Thank you, everyone, and welcome. Thank you so much, Congresswoman Mikie Sherrill, for joining us tonight. My wonderful, wonderful representative. So I just want to put out there in all transparency, welcome to the Woman Power Hour, or Power 40 Minutes that we have. I am so excited on this slate of incredible state leaders in our state. In addition to Representative Mikie Sherrill, we have the fantastic Alex Ambrose with New Jersey Policy Perspective. Absolutely my favorite organization for research. I rely on them in the state. We have Pam Frank with Plug in America. And then we have, of course, our education expert, Julie Lorea Borst. So welcome. I'm going to ask Alex and Julie to go off camera, and I'm going to introduce Pam, and Pam's going to start with the governing question. So Pam is one of the few state leaders that actually does a lot of work directly with the administration and also legislative leaders. And that makes her a great co-host for this segment on governing and governance. So all yours, Pam.
Thank you, Congresswoman. Just a pleasure to be with you twice this week. And I'm going to start off with an interesting question about a buzzword that's been circulating, I think, in Democratic circles about an abundance agenda. I think we've been hearing about this idea in Democratic circles about what we have to do to deliver housing, clean energy, all the things we need to build, and the frustration we've had over the last 30 to 40 years in not being able to deliver on those things efficiently. And so with that as a little bit of pretext, can you provide us with your vision of what I'll call a more entrepreneurial state government?
Well, yes, of course. And thank you all for having me. It really is an honor to be here. I know many of you on here through this group and other organizations you're part of have done so much for our democracy here in New Jersey, our efforts to make that more easily accessible. And then, of course, clean energy, which is something near and dear to my heart as we're going forward and trying to figure out the pathway forward, as Trump has really attacked, I think, our governor's desire to be a leader in wind energy. And hopefully we can do that in the future, but we see those attacks coming. And then I know you've worked so hard to deal with school boards, and certainly in the Republican parts of my district, especially in the Mendham area. I heard years ago as people were trying to recruit Moms for Liberty type candidates, and we started to see that infiltrate the state. And so I think school boards, I always think of those as kind of the front lines and how important that is. So I really appreciate everyone and all the work you do. And then, yes, thinking of the abundance agenda, that's so interesting because this has been kind of a niche idea in Democratic circles. I went to speak to like just a small dinner with a couple people who have been writing on the subject probably about a year ago, as we started to talk through what that could look like and why why we were feeling, and this was, of course, even before the most recent election, that we were starting to feel that we had worked to attack Trump and the horrible vision he had, but we hadn't, laid out the vision that we had successfully since 2018. I think in 2018 we saw, and many of you on this call saw because you were involved in these, the races and that cycle, whether it was for myself or Tom Malinowski or Andy Kim, as we were, really connecting on kitchen table issues. But since that time, we felt like we had been backsliding, that we hadn't laid out a vision. And to your point, I think the pathway forward is tied to some of these ideas. And that's partly where some of the ideas for my affordability agenda come from. So whether it's building houses, and we're probably about 200,000 homes short of where we need to be to drive down both mortgages and rental prices. As I like to say, we're never going to make New Jersey more affordable if we don't make housing more affordable. And that comes from both some of those discussions I'd had on the abundance agenda, but more so from just conversations I've had with people here in the state about, like whether it's the retired woman in Patterson who had to go back to work to just afford her rent, or the couple who's trying to buy their first home who can't buy anywhere near where he grew up in Livingston, and going, over an hour out and still losing out on every bid they try, or the police officer in Chatham who can't afford to live where he serves, that type of stuff. But we also have a lot of challenges, and some of it's the legislature, some of it's some of the court systems, because I think a lot of it is this lack of vision that we haven't had for a long time. And so you look at the Mount Laurel decision, for example, which was a completely innovative decision 50 years ago that kind of put our state on the map and has been studied around the country, but it was set up to attack historic redlining. It was set up to attack the affordable housing crisis. And now we have both an affordable housing crisis and segregated schools across our state. So it's doing neither. So we need that innovation. We need to do things like giving tax incentives for repurposing commercial spaces, making sure we attack the permitting problems, especially for places like at Fort Monmouth, where housing plan after housing plan after housing plan has fallen through, even though people are trying to build on already built upon areas on the old military base. So we've got to do better there. We've got to cut through red tape. We've got to be innovative. We've got to also engage in clean power. And our state has really fallen behind. We've seen solar power on average grow by 150% in states across the nation. In New Jersey, it only grew by 25% last year. It's really a missed opportunity. We know putting solar on capped landfills, on top of state buildings, and we just on top of parking lots. We have so many opportunities to do this, and we could really grow out our power. And I think it's going to take taking on PJM. I mean, we just have this grid operator that has been, by all measures, seeming to refuse to connect clean, low-cost power to the grid in favor of other power sources. So really making sure that we're getting better results there, I think, is going to be important.
Thank you. So here's another good one. So as an advocate, we know the relationship between the governor and the legislative leadership is really important to achieving results. And also the relationship, as you probably can appreciate, between their respective staffers is really important. Can you describe your relationship with legislators and leadership, and also maybe a little bit of the experience you've had in DC working across party lines that might inform how you're going to be working in Trenton?
Sure. So yeah, I could go on for a minute about this, but I'll keep it tight here. So I went into Congress with this idea that I would build broad coalitions of people who agreed on those things that we needed in New Jersey. So for example, finding Mike Turner of Dayton, Ohio, conservative Republican, to support my brownfields legislation, because they had areas that needed to be remediated in Ohio. We had areas in New Jersey. We could develop big coalitions. We could get stuff done. And so I built out those coalitions, and I thought by doing so, we would get Congress functioning again. I was half right. I was able to build out broad coalitions in only my second term, become the most effective member of the New Jersey delegation by doing so. But it didn't have that impact I wanted to see it have on Congress, obviously. I think we've seen even more partisanship and a new low in this administration. But continuing to try to build out support, continuing to understand how a legislative body works. So, for example, part of the reason I'm running for governor is because I think I can build a juggernaut of a campaign, much like I've done in my previous campaigns, where we bring a huge amount of people together around issues we care about, like I've talked about, building homes, driving down the cost of mortgages, building out clean, cheap power, making sure we're fixing our broken healthcare system. So I think these are things so many people across the state believe in. We can chart a course forward and win big. And I think that's going to really put a crack into the legislature, the House legislature in Washington, D.C., because I, having worked there, know how this works. We're going to see some of those people who have elections coming up realize what's coming. If we can build that, if we can set the table here in New Jersey for 2026, we can flip the House then, and they will see that coming, and they will start pushing back against some of the more extreme agenda items. Understanding how to work with everyone in a legislature, understanding understanding how to work with the staff of people who's writing the policy, who are the people, the key people that you need to go back and forth with to really understand how to get the policy written in the way you need it. Going back and forth with people on the ground. I always say that we do our best work when we are doing it in conjunction with people on the ground who that work is going to affect. So whether it is writing, whether it is getting money for mental health support for children coming out of COVID, or getting support for license plate readers with a rash of car thefts, going back and forth with people on the ground to make sure the statutes we're writing, the laws we're writing actually impact people on the ground in the correct way. There's always unintended consequences. And I think as governor, you take that a step further. You have the vision for the state. So as you see a state that is coming up with the first regional plan we've had in decades, that's coming up with the flood maps, which are going to show us new information about our state. We know that we need a transportation plan because we're desperately falling short, whether it's in rail, on our roads, or on the bus lines that we have across the state are no longer adequate for the state. Coming up with a new transportation plan. All of these things should work hand in glove together as governor to provide a mission for the state. So as we build out houses, as we address solar power, as we start to fix many of the transportation items we have on the ground, all that can work together as governor in creating a mission so that as people are working on all these issues, they know where the state's headed. We can get buy-in from our local municipalities because they understand and they don't feel like something's going to be shoved down their throat unexpectedly and unfunded mandates on their towns. You know, we can really work better in conjunction, I think, to get better results for the state.
Thank you. So
Thanks.
yeah, all eyes are going to be on New Jersey and Virginia. That is for sure. So can you talk a little bit about your vision, the importance of leadership here, I think, in staffing your cabinet members and heads of agencies and boards and commission, and how you would work with your leadership?
So I feel like when our governor came into office, he came in after 8 years of an administration that was, you know, I think charitably, we could say sort of hiding the ball on a lot of issues. So whether it was taking all the money from the ARC tunnel and not having a pathway forward for the Hudson River tunnels, not funding the pension system until it came to the breaking point, not making some of the key investments in the state, like in our education system. I mean, in so many different areas. And I think the governor came in and should rightfully be proud of some of the fixes that he put in place, especially fully funding the pension system for the first time in decades. But that said, I think to move beyond that, now we're at a place where we really need to address how Trenton is working or how Trenton's not working. We saw deep cuts to the workforce under Christie. We know that we have a large part of the workforce, especially some of our key experts, will be retiring soon. We have many senior people that have not trained the next generation. And then we also, I think, have a couple things going on. I was just talking to a gentleman who works in welfare, and he was saying a lot of the people that work for him actually have to go get food stamps as well. And I said, you've worked there for decades. Did that used to happen? And he said, no. I mean, you should be able to get a job full time with the state and not have to be on food stamps. So I really think we need to rethink supporting the workforce. What is the right workforce we need in Trenton? How we are going to pay that workforce and make sure that we are investing in them, and making sure that we have commissioners in place who are experts in those areas, and making sure the workforce again follows that greater mission. I think sometimes at this, I have been asked on multiple occasions to create a czar of something, to create a czar of energy, or create a czar of education, or create a czar of transportation. And finally, after about the third or fourth time, I said, I think we just need to, we have a state government that's responsible for this. So let's make sure we're investing in state government and making sure they are delivering for the people of New Jersey.
Thank you, Congresswoman.
Thank you,
Thanks.
Pam, for that time. Time's up. I have 1 minute for democracy. Oh my God. I have 1 minute because I want to give time for Alex and Julie. Alex is going to do clean energy. Julie's going to do education, which are both really important. So, Mikie, I just want to know, do you support same-day voter registration for New Jersey?
Yes.
Awesome. Do you support permanent vote by mail for New Jerseyans?
Yes. Don't we have permanent vote by mail when if you sign up for it?
That's not permanent vote by mail. That is single sign up, right? So permanent is just like 2020, where they get the ballot without having to apply, which is a barrier. It would be an optional method. It's would be in alignment with Washington, Utah, Colorado, and many other states that have they just send mail-in ballots to all their active registered voters.
Oh, great. Yep.
Awesome. So unfortunately, my time in democracies,
Oh,
hopefully
man.
there is democracy. Well, we have so short of a time. Hopefully we have a democracy to celebrate.
To talk about in the future. Yes.
Exactly. So I'm going to pass it over to Alex Ambrose, who's going to do clean energy and environment. Alex, floor is yours.
Thank you so much, Lynn. And thank you so much once again, Congresswoman, for being here tonight. As Wynn said, I'm going to talk about climate and clean energy. As I'm sure you know, Congresswoman, climate is consistently one of the top issues, especially in the governor's race here in New Jersey, and especially for my generation and younger. So I really appreciate your attention to these issues. So you had kind of already hinted at this. Because of a historic increase in auction prices from PJM, rate hikes of roughly $25 a month are coming to our bills in June. As I'm sure you know, PJM has received the worst rating of any grid in America because of its delays in getting clean energy on the grid and our fossil fuel plants that are getting more increasingly unreliable because of climate change. As governor, how would you change the way PJM does business, and how will you advance clean energy?
Those are great questions. And first of all, can I just say, it does my heart good to hear you say something as casual as you know, climate consistently ranks as one of the key issues for voters, because I have to tell you, when I was first running, and, I'm now starting to feel like maybe it was a lifetime ago, but when I was first running, and this was just 2018, it doesn't seem that long ago, people were asking me what my issues were. And I said, oh, gun safety, making sure we're taking care of military veterans, children. I said, climate. And they said, oh, nobody votes on the climate. And that was sort of the understood wisdom in 2018, that while people maybe cared, nobody actually voted on it. And now it couldn't be more different, which I am just, I'm not thrilled to see where we are with addressing climate change, but I'm thrilled to see that at least it is becoming that powerful of an issue for voters, and it's on voters' minds, especially, as you pointed out, younger voters. So thank you. Thank you to your generation. But I think you're exactly right. I mean, as we have delved into this, so I think, we're all feeling a little bit, like we have a lot of work to do here. So, and I'll say why I'm saying that. I'll tell you why I'm saying that. First of all, wind, I think, was an opportunity that we had here. Part of our problem, as we come to today, is that we took too long in some of the permitting for wind. And I say that because we have Virginia. And so Virginia was moving into wind power when we were, and they moved far more quickly on their permits. So when Trump came into office and tried to cancel all the wind projects, Virginia was so far along that they've actually been able to keep investing in wind. And we couldn't we couldn't finish our projects because we were so far behind. And so if you, when I talk about permitting reform and how it's a cost to building, it's really a cost to innovation, and it drives prices up. So as you can imagine, that's incredibly frustrating. It's, to see the federal permitting go away under Trump, and then to see now our prices going up this summer and not having a path going forward, to see that on the market we're buying power and knowing that some of that power is coming from places like West Virginia and places like Pennsylvania with coal and fracking, which I'm opposed to. So we really need a new vision. And when you look at immediately, because I do think we have come to the point now, and this is something, and I wouldn't say this is, your generation's fault, Alex. I would say this is kind of a generation before. We sort of expressed, this idea that everyone should move into clean power because it was the right thing to do. But almost in this idea, it was going to cost you an arm and a leg, but if you were a good person, you would do it, right? Well, now we're actually at a point where clean power is cheaper. And so now we almost have to re-educate the community. Like, no, this isn't, 1990. Like, it's actually cheaper now, guys. You should, you shouldn't just do it because you're, you care and you're a good person and you like your kids. You should do it because it's actually really cost effective. So that's what the problem is now, because here we have a lot of solar projects, and yet PJM is not hooking them up to the grid. And now they're raising prices as as we could have, had we hooked many of these projects up that are in waiting, we could have actually driven down prices in this cycle. And I think we can in the next cycle if we act quickly. So that's why I think solar is such a great opportunity. Wind was going to be a long-term strategic play for the long haul, because it does cost money to fix some of the transmission lines that we would need. That was more expensive. Solar is actually really cost effective really quickly. And I think community solar, where we're not even relying on PJM to hook it to the grid, is an even more exciting opportunity. Because yes, in seeing what Governor Westmore has done in Maryland, because PJM wasn't counting some of the old power generation plants that they had forced to be put back online, and they weren't even counting them against the cost. And in seeing Governor Shapiro taking them on, I do think that working with the regional Democratic governors is probably the best pathway forward to get better results from PJM, taking them on together as a more powerful group of people than just one governor. And forcing some better clean power into our grid and a better strategy going forward. But then I would reiterate, I do think we are just sleeping on community solar right now. When you look at what a state like Minnesota has been able to do, and that's really exciting, because again, we just wouldn't have some of the same grid issues with PJM if we do some of the community solar that we're capable of doing as well.
Excellent answer. Thank you, Congresswoman. You also said two of
Well,
my
thank
favorite
you.
words, permitting reform. I think that's
yes.
It's one of the least sexy issues, but one of the ones that we can really make a difference on. So
That it makes me a nerd to tell you how much I love permitting reform. So yeah.
That's great to hear. Thank you. All
Thanks.
right. So we're going to switch gears a little bit and talk about another issue that is near and dear to my heart, New Jersey Transit. So I am a New Jersey Transit rider, as millions of other New Jerseyans are, and I think it's no secret that service needs to be improved. One great step forward was the corporate transit fee, which many advocates here on the call helped to secure, and it gave the agency its first ever dedicated source of funding and avoided drastic service cuts. So I'd like to know, what specific actions would you take to continue to improve service for riders who rely on NJ Transit, both rail and bus? And do you support making the corporate transit fee permanent?
So I really like the corporate transit fee idea right now. And I would like to see the corporate transit fee actually used for transit. So that'll be a great day when we actually put that towards our transit system. I'd love to explore ideas that we see overseas on how how countries run transit systems, because I think for various reasons, we've had a real problem here. Some of the things I'd really like to invest in are transit-oriented development, getting the ratables off of that. That's how you see in many countries people pay for transit, is, the taxes on the restaurants and the houses, et cetera, that are around the transit system, that are, parking lots that are owned by the railroad, and feeding that money into the transit system. We can also do advertising on the transit systems, which I think will be very important. Another area, so the reason I'm actually not very optimistic at this moment is I just am very concerned about the attacks that I foresee coming from the Trump administration. So, as you know, we pay an incredible amount of money to Amtrak to keep their lines up to date. They've not been doing so, especially when it comes to the overhead catenary wires, which have been getting caught in the pantones above the New Jersey Transit trains. They are refusing to admit that it's the catenary wires, but I think it's pretty obvious at this point. So I got about $300 million in the last administration of federal money to fix that in Northeast Rail. I don't foresee that I'll be able to continue to go back to the well federally, and I'm worried about how, as we're trying to deal with New Jersey Transit, because we're so dependent on federal Amtrak rails, how we are going to not have another summer of hell, and then fighting, of course, for the annual appropriations that we're going to need to continue to build the Gateway Tunnel project. So that's something that I'm really focused on, finding partners, even in this administration, and finding leverage areas to push that into some of what we're doing as far as the budget going forward. The other thing I think we really have to address is that we are seeing now the state is being built out in different neighborhoods, and we've seen growth in different areas. And most of our state transportation systems sort of go from back and forth from suburbs into our major cities in Philly and in New York. We don't have a lot of north-south transit that people need. And I do think that's why, you know, as I was kind of alluding to at the beginning, I think we need a transit plan. And then as we're looking, I think that transit plan should not just handle what the population is today, but as we are looking to the future and where we are going to develop all of these houses we need to develop, you know, can we have a resurgence in Trenton? And, you know, what is Metro Park doing? What are some of the areas around the state? What is the transit system going to look like in the southern part of the state? They often call the New Jersey transit system the North Jersey transit system because they feel like it's, you know, they are being punished by not having enough transit. So we see the Glassboro rail. I think that's a good idea. The light rail, but what other transit system? And then finally, we have a real problem because many of as they were setting up the New Jersey Transit bus lines, they had a lot of private carriers that kept their bus lines, but and you know, like DeCamp, for example, in Montclair, and many of those bus lines have gone bankrupt. And now there are areas that are not being serviced anymore. So we have to figure out, again, what the transit plan of the future is going to be.
Thank you. And yes, I agree. I think with the uncertainty of federal funding, in my opinion, that makes it even more important to make the corporate transit fee permanent. So you said you like it for now. Does that mean that you would not support making it permanent?
I would like to see other options that we have on the table if there is another way, but I'm very invested in fixing the transit system. So certainly I'm supporting it right now. But should we be able to find a dedicated source of funding, like some of the transit-oriented development, which I would like to see, I'd like to understand if that is an option before I would say I would want to make anything permanent.
Okay, thank you. We just have
Thanks.
1 minute left, and this is kind of a big question. So I wish you luck with this. We're having a warehouse boom here in New Jersey, and residents, especially those in already overburdened communities, are concerned about the increase in air pollution. We also know that the Trump administration is attempting to roll back many air pollution standards, including ones that allow New Jersey to set more stringent air pollution protections. As such, will you oppose any rollbacks of these protections, including advanced clean trucks, which helps clean electric trucks be available to transition away from diesel?
So I have been opposed to the Trump administration's rollbacks of any of the clean air provisions. I know in the first Trump administration, they had rolled back much of the way. I was on the Science, Space, and Technology Committee. Much of the protections we have on stacks, which had been cancer clusters and carcinogens coming out of some of the stacks in our factories and generation areas. And the Trump administration had rolled back the requirements to have scrubbers on top of the stacks. I've certainly been opposed to that. I'm opposed to any Trump rollbacks of any clean air or pollution standards that we have, and I certainly think that if the state, it has always been the law that if the state wants to go above and beyond that, the federal government sets the minimum standard. So to have the federal government coming after states for going above and beyond, I think oversteps federal power. I think some of that's a states' rights issue, quite frankly, and my attorney general would fight the federal government should that take place.
All right.
Thank you
Thank you
so
so
much,
much,
Alex.
Congresswoman. Yeah, I'll
Thank
transition back to
you.
Thank
Lynn.
you.
All right, Julie, you have 10 minutes. I'm so sorry you're short on time.
No
10
problem.
minutes. Julie with Save Our Schools NJ. Welcome.
Hi, Congresswoman. It's very nice to finally meet you. I know folks in your offices. We have lots of mutual friends. I was just talking to Sue Altman
I know.
this
I can't
morning.
believe
She
this is the
says
first
hi.
time. I know. I feel like I know you, but yes.
Yes, exactly. I'm also a co-director of the newly minted New Jersey Institute for Community Schools at St. Elizabeth University. Which
Oh, wow.
we need to talk about. It's not among the questions, so I'm not going to ask you about community schools, but that's something
But
we need
yes, to be
talking about in
continued.
the future. Absolutely. Very quickly, let me just knock two things out of the way really quickly with yes, no's. There was a question from somebody in the audience tonight, and they wanted to know whether you would commit to fully funding teacher pension fund each year. So that's one.
Yes.
The other yes, no question. Okay, great. And then the other question, so ECHA, the Educational Choice for Children's Act, which is a federal voucher bill. It's a tax credit scheme. And of course, vouchers have all kinds of interesting names. Do you support vouchers for private schools?
I'm not familiar with that particular bill, but I have not been supportive of vouchers for private schools. No.
Great.
I've
Well,
been
I
opposed to
that your office
vouchers.
has more information about that because that's definitely coming. And to get more into the funding thing, since I just spent this morning with the Senate Budget Committee providing testimony on these things. So SFRA, or School Funding Reform Act, needs some work. The governor in this coming fiscal year has made some budgetary changes that allow at least for special education, for that part of the formula to account for every single student rather than a state average. Still treats every disability as though it's the same, but at least it's getting some more money in there. We know there definitely needs to be some tweaks because it's not really accounting for what a future teacher force might look like. For instance, it doesn't account for changes in the standards in New Jersey. Do you have a vision? And I love the fact that you're talking about having a vision for something, because I was talking to a colleague today about that very thing. We need a vision for things. So what is your vision for school funding in New Jersey? And also tied into that is the very real possibility that funding through federal IDEA is going to go away for special ed families. It's about $500 million or so, give or take, that New Jersey gets. What do you see there? And also Medicaid obviously is tied into that also, not just for children with disabilities, but for adults with disabilities in particular.
Yeah, so I'm really glad to hear that because I have been talking about my concerns that the school funding formula doesn't appropriately fund children with disabilities. And yeah, I hear you that it's still not meeting the needs of all of the different needs of students, but I'm so glad to hear it's at least going to the individual students, which I think will be a better model to start to address the shortfalls in the school funding formula. So that's good to hear. I think, yeah, I mean, look, I think the school funding was just attacked under the Christie administration. I think we saw, horrible cuts. And it's funny because I will tell you, when I speak to other people from other parts of the country and talk about how we have the best schools in the nation and talk about some of what's going on in our school system, our public school system, it is the envy of people across the country. I have to tell you, it gave me no small amount of delight to hear from someone who had moved to Florida during COVID. And when my husband mentioned to them, oh, you must be living large, Florida, like no taxes and, everything's cheap. And he goes, it's not that great because you have to, you can't send your kid to public school because all the public schools are bad. So then all the private schools have a wait list a mile long and then you have to pay to get them there because there's no bus or whatever. And I was so happy to hear that he was realizing how great New Jersey is. We may, there's there are shortfalls and we have work to do, but it certainly is, I think, something that is maybe something sometimes people take for granted, our great public school system. But my vision, I have always believed that a public education, I'm a product of the public school system, as is my husband. My son's at Montclair High School right now. And I have always believed that a well-run public school system is absolutely the best way that you can provide opportunity to the greatest amount of people. But I don't think one size fits all. So I do love to say that we have the best public school system in the nation. But what I know, and what I think everyone in New Jersey knows, and certainly now that we have this segregation court case, now we all have seen, it's really still by zip code. And so my vision is that it's not. And we know that one size doesn't fit all. When you're talking about a community, when you're talking about maybe an unsafe community and the trauma that involves, making sure school systems can handle that. When you're talking about a community where kids don't have enough food, I envision that we are running a public school system that meets the needs of the community. And in some of those communities, that's a community-based school system where you have health centers there, where you have nutrition, where you have high-intensity tutoring, which I love that model. That's something I've worked very hard on at the federal government. It's evidence-based, and certainly as we see some of these math scores that we're facing in our state, how we're going to help students catch up and really invest in kids. And so, I've seen this model. I also think that having a model in our school system to meet the needs of the community also involves making sure kids are ready when they graduate from high school to make sure they can take advantage of the opportunity our state offers. So some kids are going to have to work right away. So there are schools that are providing tracks to kids so they can go through a culinary track, or that they can go through a track to go into law enforcement, et cetera. And something that, from discussions at St. Elizabeth's and other areas, this idea of stackable degrees, so that I don't think now it's an A-B choice, right? I don't think you either go into the workforce or you go to college now. I think that we can have stackable degrees where maybe you have to go into the workforce right away, but we are making you ready throughout our schools to enter into the workforce, but then you will be able to get certificates and continue to stack your degrees from there. All that's to say that I envision that our schools are going to create students that are ready to take advantage of the opportunities here in New Jersey and thrive. So what does that mean on the ground? It means fixing some of the school funding formula. It hasn't been updated since 2008. It means continuing to work on students with disabilities and how we're appropriately funding that. Ensuring that the money that we are spending on schools goes to students, goes to teachers, and goes to school buildings. I think less of it needs to go to administrative costs. I think we have a bloated administrative system right now as we're really trying to train teachers. I love high intensity tutoring because I think that provides pathways for people into teaching, and they find they love it, because we really do need to grow the workforce of teachers. And I think it means making sure that there aren't these wild swings for school systems year over year, so that you don't get to August and suddenly you're laying off 10 teachers, right? Like, we really need to make sure that schools know what to expect so they can plan for the future. And so that is sort of the broad vision I have. I could talk to you, and I think we should talk more, and I'll talk to Julie and different ones on my team who have spoken to you so we can build it out. There's so much more I think we could talk about, but that is in the broadest strokes kind of my vision for our New Jersey school system.
Great. We should definitely talk more about that. And then as far as protecting Medicaid, or what it is that we do for families that are relying on that, and I'm talking about this mostly in the disability space. So how are we making sure that families who have adults with disabilities still can access services should this go away or be cut greatly? Because New Jersey, no state really has the money themselves to make up the difference in whatever federal cuts might come. So how are you going to do that? How are you going to plan for that?
Right. So I don't, as you said, no state has that. I mean, we're looking at about $10 billion in Medicaid cuts. That's students with disabilities. That's 1 in 3 children who have their healthcare through Medicaid. That's seniors who are in nursing homes based on Medicaid. But we also have a million other horrible cuts coming down the road that we're having to deal with in the state to take care of everything from homeless people to SNAP funding, so children can eat. I mean, you name the vulnerable population that exists, and the Republicans seem to be going after them. So I think it's not as much, hey, here's the plan, here's how we're going to rework it, because we're talking huge numbers. We're talking up to half our state budget. So it's not a matter of, we're just going to cut parks funding while we have to feed children until we figure it out, right? That we don't have that kind of extra, $20 billion to play with. So what I think we really have to do is make sure we're prioritizing. So what are the priorities? And I think the priorities start with our most vulnerable population, and making sure that, children have food, people have homes, and then starting to lift up the programs that we have so that we can get people stabilized where they need to be. But you're pointing out some areas that are going to need long-term stabilization. It's not as if we can just say, okay, we have an adult child with disabilities, we just have to get them a good job and they'll thrive, right? Like, these are long-term care that the state is going to need to provide, which seems to be beyond the federal government right now, and understanding that there are things that a government in the richest country in the world should be providing to vulnerable citizens, and that we can provide. So I think it's less about here's the exact plan and more about what are your priorities going to be, and are you going to take care of people with the federal cuts coming? And the answer to that would certainly be a resounding yes.
Thank you so much,
We did it in 10 minutes.
Congresswoman. Thank
For
you,
11
Julie.
minutes.
We are out of time. The
Thank you.
Congresswoman has a hard stop, so I want to respect that time. We really appreciate the time that you spent with us tonight with our powerhouse women. Hopefully next time we get an hour. But I want to thank my co-hosts, Alex Ambrose, Pam Frank, Julie Lorea Borst, and of course, Congresswoman Mikie Sherrill. Thank you for doing what you can to protect our country while you're running a very hard campaign. So thank you to everyone who tuned in, and that's it for our gubernatorial spotlights. Thank you so much. Good night, everybody.
Thanks, women. Thank you all so much. Great conversation. Good night.
Thank you.
Thank
Good night.
you.
Bye-bye.
Thank you.